There we go. Good morning, Jabagwan. Welcome to Bhakti House. There we go. Let's see. It's better. All right. So this morning, we're going to look at the Yoga Sutras. Again, we're using Venkatasananda's translation, his new interpretive translation from 1975, I believe this was. Yes, 1975. And some of it will be a little wordy. The sutras themselves are much shorter than, because he interweaves his own interpretation and commentary, not really commentary, but his own interpretation into each sutra, and I will do the same. I will simplify, or rather, maybe help us make this a little more practical. But before we get to that point, hold on. Need to arrange. There we go. Let's. Technology updates. It's. There we go. Technology updates are a good thing, but they also require adjustment. And so when I updated the software this morning, I have not had a chance yet to look at it. So if we run into some technical difficulties, no, it's just, technical difficulties. Some of you may remember from when we were kids, occasionally television broadcasts would be interrupted, and at the bottom it would say, "We are experiencing technical difficulties." Been a long time since you've seen that, right? Well, welcome to Bhakti House, where sometimes we experience technical difficulties. Please stand by. All right, enough of that. Let's chant. As you inhale, bring the hands to prayer position. As you exhale, let the eyes open. Jai Bhagwan. And again, welcome. Oh, it is Mantra Monday. I'm skipping Mantra Monday today. Mantra Mondays is when I'll give a little bit of exposition on the Asatoma prayer itself. Not today. The Vrittis. So Patanjali tells us in the first 4 sutras, now is the exposition of yoga, now is the tool of yoga, now is how yoga is communicated. Yoga is the yoga is the stilling of the modifications of the mind. Then the seer abides in its own true nature, and at other times the seer appears to take on the forms of the mental modifications. What does this mean? This means that when the mind is completely empty, that there are only 2 present at that moment. There is the emptiness of the mind, and there is something that observes the emptiness of the mind without any modifications. That observing of the emptiness of the mind is consciousness, the seer. That is who you truly are. And at other times, this consciousness that we are appears to take on the forms of the mental modifications. It appears as I am hungry, I am man, I am woman, I am husband, I am wife, I am male, female. Oh, I hit that one already. I am old, young. I am a skin color. I am a Trekkie, or a nerd, or a jock, or a performer, or an artiste, or whatever. No. Those are all activities. You are not an activity. And Patanjali categorizes all activities of the mind into 5 categories. Well, let's read first, then we'll come back and we'll talk that way. Vritaya, Panchataya, Klishta, Aklishta. Klishta, Aklishta. These movements, these apparent movements, apparent, it's an activity. These apparent movements or states or moods of the mind, which are concepts, ideas, or images in it, can be grouped under 5 categories, irrespective of whether they are experienced as painful or non-painful. Have you ever had an experience that was not either painful nor unpainful, and whether or not they are covertly or clearly tainted by the fivefold afflictions described later. So, well, we'll come back to that. Can you think of anything that you have ever experienced that does not fall into the categories of painful or non-painful? And I've had people say, yes, I've had experiences that weren't painful, or rather, I've had experiences that weren't non-painful, but they weren't painful. If it's not painful, the only other option is that means it's non-painful. Non-painful doesn't mean enjoyable. Non-painful means it does not cause pain. Have you ever had an experience that falls outside of something that causes pain or something that does not cause pain? The answer is no. Pramana viparaya vikalpa nidra smrityaya. These 5 categories of apparent movements of the mind are: 1. Proven theory, which is often assumed to have been reliably proved and therefore to constitute right knowledge, or realization of the movement of thought. 2. Unsound thinking or wrong knowledge, assumptions, presumptions, beliefs, deductions, and inference may also be included here, or verbal condemnation of the movement of thought as wrong. 3. Fancy or hallucination or imagination, totally unrelated to any proven or assumed theories, which may also include the delusion that one is already out of the movement of thought. I am free from the thought is a thought. 4. A state of dullness or sleep, or succumbing to the movement of thought, feeling it is impossible to go beyond it. I'm never going to be able to get my mind to shut up. 5. Memory, or the recollection of a teaching or an experience which gives rise to the notion that it is possible to go beyond the movement of thought. Such a notion forms an image. So first he says that all experiences are either pain-causing or non-pain-causing. 2, and then second, in describing these things, he says there's 5 categories: right knowledge, wrong knowledge, imagination, sleep, and memory. Now, can you think of any activities of the mind that do not fall within those 5 categories: right knowledge, wrong knowledge, imagination, sleep, and memory? Now, recently as in last week was long, had a student ask me, Ramdas, what about emotion? Where does emotion fall? Is it right knowledge, wrong knowledge, imagination, sleep, or memory? Or does it just not count because it's not actually a thought? We'll come back to that question. I'll allow you to kind of contemplate over it as we read a little bit more about these Vrittis, and then I'll walk you through my own experience with answering that question. So the first thing he says, but by the way, how clever is Patanjali? The first thing he points out is right knowledge. Right knowledge is a vritti. And we might kind of resist that because, well, right knowledge, that's a good thing to have. And Babaji, he agreed. He said, though it is true that true liberation comes only through practice, in the beginning, right knowledge, correct knowledge is needed. We got to know what we're up to if we're going to have any chance of actually being successful. I can swing a hammer around very, skillfully, hammering in nails here and there, and never build a house. All I've done is pound in a whole bunch of nails. Without a little bit of correct knowledge in the beginning, what are the blueprints? What am I supposed to be building? I have no hope of actually building a house. So, the next one. And yes, I'm trying to read. I've been inspired by one of my teacher apprentices. As she reads, she's very diligently learning the Sanskrit as best as she can. And so I'm doing my very best in inspired by that to pronounce the Sanskrit myself, and quite honestly, probably butchering it badly. And why not? Pratyaksha, Numana, Gama, Pramanani. What are proven theories? So what is correct knowledge? Theories are said to derive their proof from one or the other of the following sources. So he's going to say this correct knowledge comes from these different sources, and there's three. One, direct perception, sense experience, or intuition. I've had the personal experience of it. Direct perception. Two, deduction or extension of direct perception and sense experiences or beliefs in the absence of direct proof or experience. Indirect proof is deduced from the right or wrong application of principles of logic chosen by oneself, which often lead to vague generalizations or presumptions that since the theory comes from a usually reliable source, it must be correct. In other words, I thought about it. And based on my previous experience, this is what I can infer is going on now. 3, scriptural or other trustworthy testimony or authority, where this book itself would be considered scriptural in this case. My words for you are considered scriptural in this case. You're listening to whatever degree that is for you a trusted authority. Read from a trusted authority. So therefore this gives you a little bit of right knowledge that you can then apply your own thinking to and begin to put into practice to test. Where again, one accepts as proof the statements of those whom one has accepted as the authority, such acceptance being blind and fanatic. In other words, if you're just believing me, that's blind faith. It doesn't sound like he speaks very highly of that. He calls it fanatic. You need to start thinking about reasoning with what you are hearing, and if you have a copy of this, with what you're reading. And as you begin to think about and reason and deduce, then you can begin to examine your own experience. Do you actually have experience with these things? Can you find a way to experience these things? And then these things stop being just scriptural things. They stop being blind faith on your part. They stop being just thoughts you've cobbled together. They become your experience, and you become the new scriptural authority through your own experience. Viparyayo mitya jnanam atarupa pratistanam. Unsound thinking or wrong knowledge is based on error, on mistaken identity, where the cognition is unreal and faulty, and hence the knowledge is faulty too, and where there is no agreement between the expression and the experience, between the substance and the description. Do you really need an in-depth explanation of what wrong knowledge is? Wrong knowledge, simply put, is when we're wrong. It doesn't make us bad. It doesn't make us evil. That may or, well, I'm not getting into that. That's a whole other topic we're not touching on. Wrong knowledge is where we make a mistake. Wrong knowledge can lead us to right knowledge. He even said so earlier, that when we recognize something is not working out the way we think it should be working out, that allows us to investigate a little more closely, and if not next find the right knowledge, at least move us in that direction, because we know, well, that didn't work. That didn't work. Hopefully we can find some scriptural authority, a how-to video on YouTube to repair the washer. Washer doesn't need repairing. Stay good. But how-to videos. Often we might try to fix something on our own, and then we realize, I don't know what I'm doing. Wrong knowledge. How-to video. Oh, now that's how you do that. Oh, I couldn't see that myself. Now we have right knowledge. Sabda jnana, nupati vastu sunyo vikalpa. Fanciful or hallucinatory expressions and even experiences or imaginations are sound without substance. Empty words and phrases or descriptions which have no corresponding reality. However realistic or inspiring or satisfying they may appear to be, hence they are the most deceptive and least trustworthy. Imagination. Imagination. I imagine that things might be like this. Least reliable. Most deceptive and least trustworthy, he says. Abhava pratyaya lambana vritti nidra. When nothingness or void is the content of the mind, when the idea of nothingness alone prevails, or when the mind thinks that it does not think at all, I think I'm not having a thought, is still a thought, there is sleep, which is a state of mental or psychic inertia. Everything has stopped. Which seems to be stilling the mind, right? So why would it be considered a vritti? The mind is still. The mind is quiet. Because we can't observe. At that moment, we're not able to observe, oh, mind is still, observing is still happening, and have the realization, I'm not this stillness of mind. You become completely wrapped up in sleep, to the point where you believe your dreams are real while they're occurring. Anubhuta Vishaya Sampramosha Smriti. Smriti. Memory is the non-abandonment of the impression created by past experiences, which is revived with much the same impact on the mind stuff as at the time of the original experience, but with or without the original details and emotional response. Sometimes. Memory is a thought about a thing. So let's look at both memory and imagination side by side. Memory is a thought about a thing that happened in the past that's not present nor happening now. And imagination is a thought about a thing, typically from the future, where the thought or thing is not happening or present now. Now, imagination has a broader scope to it. We can also imagine things about the past. Something in the past happened, memory, and we imagined other circumstances around it. It can also deal with things that have never happened. And we imagine that some fanciful creature comes flying through the sky, scoops us up, and we, off we go into the never-ending story. Memory gets a bad rap. Actually, all five of these do, because it's very easy to fall into the trap. These things are bad. They're not bad. These things simply prevent us from being able to easily recognize that we're not these five things. You are not right knowledge. You are not wrong knowledge. You are not imagination, sleep, or memory. These are various activities of the mind. You are the observing consciousness, the knowing awareness, the seer, the witness, that sees both stillness and chaos. It's easier to recognize the self as the self. It is easier to observe when the mind is still, because there's nothing going on in there. It is much more difficult when there's chaos going in there, because we tend to be drawn into the chaos and believe I am the chaos, or we become enmeshed in the chaos, part and parcel, and believe that. So the Vrittis They're not obstacles. They're not detrimental. Wrong knowledge may be detrimental at times, imagination as well. We can certainly use all of them to our detriment. Have you ever had an argument because you were right? Sounds detrimental. I'm not encouraging you to get rid of right knowledge, neither is Patanjali. Encouraging you to recognize you are not the right knowledge you have. All right, let's come back to our final question and wrap up here because we're coming to the end of the time. Emotion. What is emotion? We can confidently say that it's a vritti. Because vrittis, as Patanjali said, they color the mind. They cause us to believe that we are not this observing self, but we are the thing that is active in the mind. If you have ever said, I am angry, you have found yourself caught in a vritti. By the way, a vritti is a whirl, like a whirlpool. And if you've ever been around my dear friend Chandrakant, when he talks about vrittis, he'll go, you know, we get really wound up in this vritti. So, I can just hear him. I am angry. Anger is an emotion. And that emotion has colored the mind and may very well have caused the self to believe I am angry rather than I feel anger. And those two sentences give us an idea of how to approach determining what vritti emotion falls under. Where does emotion start? I feel anger. It starts as something we feel. It starts as a sensation in the body. Just think for a moment, what does anger feel like? Well, heart races. There might be a tightening of muscles. Might get a little sweaty. You might feel some heat come up. Jaw might clench. You might feel a little tense. Now, before we go any further with that, ask yourself, what does excitement feel like? When you get really excited by something, there's a change in the heart rate, usually goes up. Breath goes up, you might feel a little bit of heat. There might be a little tension. Sounds a lot like what I just described with anger. So what is it that differentiates the sensations we feel from anger or surprise, excitement, nervousness, happiness, love sometimes even? What is it as we feel these different emotions, what is it that turns them from just raw sensation into an emotion that we can communicate with someone else? Well, we think about them. And in thinking about them, we put a label on them, correct? And that label, if we're being attentive, could be said to be right knowledge. I have this sensation because of this experience, and I feel anger because of this. Anger really is an expression of, some of you will laugh at this, is an expression of, this should not be like this. Anger. And a fear that if it is like this, then something bad will happen. any emotion starts out as a sensation. And as we recognize that sensation, we put a label on it. And again, as I said, I hope it's usually right knowledge. We're rightly identifying this emotion. Whether that's helpful or not is a whole other discussion. But I hope that it's at least right knowledge. The other option is that we're experiencing some sensation and we're labeling it with wrong knowledge because we've had some sort of bad experience, some painful experience in the past, some trauma that has caused us to associate this thing with suffering, pain, and so forth. This is why sometimes when we feel someone giving us an expression of love, it's painful. It's wrong knowledge. But because of past painful experiences, we've associated something which should be joyful, which hopefully would bring us some more love and happiness. Because of that past painful association, it's now, the mind is interpreting it as pain, so that's wrong knowledge. And as you're now trying to think about it, now you're applying imagination to the same thing. All right. I don't want to take up too much more time of your morning this morning because it is now 8:35. And this is intended to be a half an hour of satsang. But we covered a wide range of things this morning. So our investigation into emotion should give you a clue about just about everything. Almost everything we experience in life starts as a sensation. We take information in through the five senses. Taste is a sensation. Hearing, sight, they are sensations. They come through the senses. The mind then takes past experience, memory, to try to help us make sense out of these senses and sensations. Sometimes the mind does a good job and sometimes not so much. My recommendation to you is to come back to the sensations you feel. Let go of the labels of the mind. Come back to the sensations that are felt, because there may still be some activity of the mind of the feeling of the sensation, but you're going to be less likely to be enmeshed in those 5 vrittis of right knowledge, wrong knowledge, imagination, sleep, and memory. And as you go right to the source, the sensation, rather than the news source, the sensationalization, we are more likely to feel what the appropriate response is, rather than to try to think it. Start to give that an experiment. Feel. Notice what you're thinking and go to what that sensation is that brought that up. All right, my friends. The time, as I said, our time is spent this morning. So let's bring our time this morning to a close. And for those of you who are just joining us, you'll be able to skim through this, watch through this video again in just a moment. Let's let the eyes close. We'll chant one sound of Om. Remember, the Vrittis, right knowledge, wrong knowledge, imagination, sleep, and memory, they're not things to be avoided. But in the beginning, we need to change our relationship with them. So go back to the sensations you feel rather than the thoughts you think. Let's take a breath in. As you inhale, bring the hands to prayer position. As you exhale, let the eyes open. Jai Bhagwan. Thank you again for joining me. Tomorrow will be morning sadhana. So we'll do 30 minutes of some postures tomorrow morning. We'll do a little bit of chanting. We'll do a few rounds of sun salutation. and a little bit of meditation. I hope you'll join me at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, Mountain Time. And until then, Jai Bhagwan.